This is Luke O'Brien, who is a journalist over at the Huffington Post. A journalist, you know what that means, infallible, an avatar of the free press. To call the acts people like Luke O'Brien partake in yellow journalism would be an insult to whatever remains of places like Gawker. A Twitter user under the pseudonym Amy Mech is an outspoken critic of Islam, a Twitter iteration of R the Donald from what I have seen. Of course, this enables the tolerant ones to claim that this is a woman who is fostering hatred. This would be the justification for Luke O'Brien of the Huffington Post to run an elaborate article about her and her past, including her personal information. Here's a short piece from the end of the article. Unfortunately, hate that festers online against any group of people doesn't always stay online. Norwegian terrorist Anders Breivik murdered 77 people in 2011 after radicalizing himself with the same anti-Muslim propaganda that Amy Mech spreads. What I find so irritating about this type of logic is that it places the blame for actions onto a third party rather than the person that is actually responsible. This is the liberal equivalent of saying video games and heavy metal are to blame for every tragedy. Strange how the pharmaceutical industry and the automotive industry never seem to face the contrived virtue signaling from politicians and entertainers who take their money. In the article, Luke included yearbook pictures of Amy Mech to confirm her identity publicly. Now, some people might say because she is an outspoken public figure that it's perfectly fine for a journalist to make her identity known as it is beneficial to the public. I, however, disagree. But more than just doxing her, he contacted the employers of her husband, asking them in a passive-aggressive way to fire this woman's husband, which they did, of course. Think that's shady? Here's another bit from the article. Sino showed up at the Fishkill apartment complex over Memorial Day weekend, dry-cleaned shirts hanging in the back of his Audi A5. On Tuesday, he was still there, and Amy Mech was still tweeting. Maybe I am reading this wrong, but it sounds to me like this journalist is stalking him. How else would he know what this man drives, what he has hanging in his car? And what might the goal be of making this information public? Intimidation. You might ask yourself, is this ethical? Should this be behavior that journalists, remember, the personification of the free press, should indulge in? If you do a quick search, Google Journalism Code of Ethics, you can find the following advice. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics offers the following advice, which is representative of the practical ideas of most professional journalists. Show compassion for those who may be affected adversely by news coverage. Use special sensitivity when dealing with children and inexperienced sources or subjects. Be sensitive when seeking or using interviews or photographs of those affected by tragedy or grief. Recognize that gathering and reporting information may cause harm or discomfort. Pursuit of the news is not a license for arrogance. Recognize that private people have a greater right to control information about themselves than do public officials and others who seek power, influence, or attention. Only an overriding public need can justify intrusion into anyone's privacy. Show good taste, avoid pandering to lurid curiosity. Be cautious about identifying juvenile suspects or victims of sex crimes. Be judicious about naming criminal suspects before the formal filing of charges. And balance a criminal suspect's fair trial rights with the public's right to be informed. This person, Luke O'Brien, isn't going to lose his job for the way that he harassed, doxed, and intimidated people he disagreed with. He won't even face consequences for acting in ways that many people would consider unethical. In fact, he was cheered on by his compatriots and was also backed up by Jared Holt and Right Wing Watch. I can't imagine the excuse for this behavior, especially since they began targeting her brother's employer now that they saw success with getting her husband fired. The goal seems simple. This isn't about them being good Samaritans to the company's PR. This is about them trying to remove the ability to buy food and pay rent from somebody because they don't like what they have to say. As it turns out, though, Luke O'Brien is now claiming to be the victim. Imagine that. He says that right-wingers are coming after him and saying mean things to him on the internet. Luke deliberately sought out personal information and published said personal information through the Huffington Post, harassed that person's husband's employer until they fired him, and now he wants you to feel bad for him. because people are calling him out on the things that he had just done. Worse than that, he still seems to maintain a sort of pride from using intimidation tactics to attempt to silence some woman who was a little critical of Islam. Imagine what he might do to other people. Imagine where his journalism career is going to take him. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Jared Holt and Right Wing Watch are claiming that he didn't dox anyone. These are false allegations. But if you go onto the Huffington Post article, which is linked in the description if you want to check it out for yourself, all of that information has indeed been published on the Huffington Post.